So thank you very much for coming today. And as you must have seen from the announcement, this is in continuation of the previous talk that I gave. And this is part of the larger series that I will be giving in the next few months. And I might have shared this earlier, that we are going to talk about the transformation of the lower three planes of existence, the plane of physical, the plane of vital, and the plane of mental. And the reason why I have started with the plane of the mental is because both Mother and Sri Aurobindo have pointed out that this yoga begins in the mind. The transcendence of mind is very important, but incidentally, it begins in the mind. And because it begins in the mind, it is very important that we pay attention to the mental plane. And also, when we look at the evolutionary scheme of things, it is very easy to conceptualize the transcendence of oneself from one's body and one's emotions. You know, we are able to see our body. And the moment we say that we are not this body, there is a certain degree of dissociation, of disconnect that can happen from one's body. And in the larger culture, given the way emotions have been discussed in the intellectual scheme of things, the suppression of emotions, not the transcendence, the suppression of emotions is very much a part of the academic scheme of things. Incidentally, it is the mind which is given primacy. And the mind is given primacy right from the very beginning of our education. So what happens is that we not only grow our mind very strong, we also begin to identify ourselves with our mind. You know, having a good IQ is considered, a good attribute all over the world at this point in time. So identification with the mind and with intelligence, in a certain sense, gets emphasized and underlined. In the yogic scheme of things, dissociating oneself from the mind is extremely important. So the mind has to be paid extra attention to. That is one of the main reasons also why I have started from the transcendence of mind, or why I have started from the mental plane. In Vedanta, in Advaita Vedanta, there's a particular way in which the transcendence of mind has been emphasized. And I'm going to talk about it very briefly. So, Vedanta basically says that you have to disconnect yourself from your body, from your emotions, from your mind, from your intuitive plane of existence, from the plane of Ananda. And having transcended or disconnected yourself from all these planes, you have to station yourself in self, which is the self of all the selves, animate and inanimate, that you find in this world. So in a certain sense, you can say that self with a capital S is a subjective entity. And in order to realize that self first intellectually, it creates a pathway. So what does it say? It basically engages us in an exercise. It says that you look around. And when you look around, you see different entities. You see a computer, you see a table, you see a pen stand, you see a phone, you see books, you see trees, you see so many things around. And it says that whatever you can see or observe does not belong to the realm of the subjective self, but it belongs to the realm of objects. One could not have any disagreement with this. I mean, this book is an object. This phone is an object. So Vedanta says whatever you can observe belongs to the realm of objects. After we have engaged in this exercise for a good period of time, it says, well, let's move to the next plane of existence, the plane of emotions, the pranamaya kosha. Are you able to observe your emotions? You will say, yes, I can observe my emotions. All that I need to do is basically step back and observe or see whether I'm happy, sad, angry, frustrated, and so on and so forth. So it says, because you are able to observe your emotions, because you are able to metaphorically see your emotions, you are not your emotions. Emotions do not belong to the subjective self. They belong to the realm of objects. It takes the inquiry a little further. It says, can you observe your thoughts? And you will say, yeah, I can observe my thoughts. All that I need to do is basically step back and focus on my mind. And I will be able to observe my thoughts. We all know that thoughts reside in the mind. Now, because we are able to observe our thoughts, we are able to observe our mind. And because we are able to observe our mind belongs to the realm of objects, not to the realm of subjective self, as per Advaita Vedanta. So look at this inquiry. You are not your body. You are not your emotions. You are not your mind. And so on and so forth. What is it that you are? You are that witness consciousness, which is observing everything. That witness consciousness is your subjective self, and it is that subjective self which has to be experientially realized. Now, people who are familiar with the literature or biography or autobiography of Sri Aurobindo would know that one of his first spiritual exercises was to basically observe his mind, which was given to him by this yoga teacher by the name of Lele. Lele in Gujarat asked him to basically observe his mind, observe his thoughts, and told him that after a certain point in time, you will realize that thoughts come from outside. And all that you need to do is, before those thoughts enter your consciousness, enter your mind, throw them out. And Sri Aurobindo writes, and we read, from Sri Aurobindo last time when we were talking about this topic, that he was able to see thoughts entering his mind as concrete reality. He was able to get hold of those thoughts and throw them out. And after a certain point in time, his mind fell completely silent. And he says that the experience that he had never left him. So what happened there? There was a significant transformation of consciousness of Sri Aurobindo that occurred. And in the literature of integral yoga, we call this as reversal of consciousness. Sri Aurobindo calls this as reversal of consciousness. We are evolving out of our involved self. Now, this is Vedanta. I underwent my own process of transcending my mind. And I want to talk about it because, this may be helpful to people who are practitioners of integral yoga or yoga in general. I won't dwell too much on it, but, I will shed some light on this. This was early 90s, when I was in my 20s, when I got consumed by deep existential questions. Who am I? What am I doing here? What is the ultimate truth? What happens to me, when I die? Do I exist when I die, or is it the end of everything? I mean, these are some of the existential questions, that I was dealing with. And because of these existential questions, I was also encountering certain psychological problems like depression. I can say that, I was experiencing existential angst. And because of these issues that I was encountering, I decided to shift from studying chemistry to studying psychology. So I went to studying psychology, with a lot of vitality, if you will, because through this discipline, I basically wanted to understand myself. That was the quest at that point in time. I also want to underline that before I started studying psychology, I was a student of science. And in the preliminary stages of studying science, this dichotomy between true and false is very stringent. Of course, we have quantum mechanics in science, but the quantum understanding of science happens much later in science. At least at the undergraduate level, you're dealing with very strict dichotomies, true, false, right, wrong, and so on and so forth. So when I go to studying psychology, what is it that I encounter? I encounter a plethora of psychological schools. Now, incidentally, all of these claim scientific status for themselves, right? And they're all at variance with one another. Now, instead of finding, answers to my existential questions got further deepened. The first conclusion at that point in time was that psychology as a discipline is bogus. It's complete nonsense. All of these schools and all these psychologists, they're talking about same issues from different vantage points, and they're all claiming, truth or scientific status for themselves, and they all disagree with one another. So I decided to drop out, from psychology. Now, I was fortunate that I got caught by one of my professors who really used to like me, because I was really interested in the discipline, and he had seen me over a few months that I spent, numerous hours sitting at the Delhi University Library, poring over books. So he had seen that, I was a serious student, and I think that was sufficient for, for me to get endeared to him. So he got hold of me and we started a conversation, and I had a mouthful for him, with regards to the discipline. I said, what sort of discipline is this? They're all claiming scientific status for themselves and disagreeing with one another. So what's going on? So he very patiently listened to me. And then he said, well, these are some very important questions, and psychology as a discipline itself is basically raising these questions at this point in time. And, and if you come back to the program, then you would be able to write your dissertation on the topic. In India, for your master's, you write dissertation and thesis for your PhD, unlike what you do here. You write dissertation for your PhD and thesis for your master's. So I was taken aback, and I said, well, will I be able to do this? He said, yes, you can. You will be able to do it. So, and he offered the support. So I went back to the program, and what he did was that he put me to study philosophy of science. He said, well, why don't you try and understand what science is? After all, science is a human activity. It has been put together by human beings. Science also has a philosophy. So why don't you understand science from within? Look at science, from the perspective of its philosophers. And at that point in time, we identified Francis Bacon, who was considered father of modern science. Thomas Kuhn, who has written this path-breaking book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And Paul Feyerabend, who has written, another very controversial book in terms of philosophy of science called Against Method. And when I started, studying this, then I got introduced to the concept of paradigm. And Thomas Kuhn, describes paradigm very well. He basically says that paradigm consists of two essential components: disciplinary matrix or disciplinary matrix and shared exemplars. This was specifically for you, Earl, given that you focus on pronunciation based on the conversation that we had in Lodi not too long ago. My Indian pronunciation would make me call it matrix, whereas the American pronunciation will make me pronounce it as matrix. So disciplinary matrix and shared exemplars. Now, what he also exposed me to was that paradigms have certain assumptions that are never subjected to any empirical investigation. These are uncontested truths within the scientific community, because of which scientific investigation happens. Now, when you look at history of science, there are two ways of looking at things. One is that there is an evolution that has happened from Newtonian physics to quantum physics. Of course, in between you have two very important paradigms or two stops. The electromagnetic paradigm of Faraday and the paradigm of relativity of Einstein. So one way is to look at, history of science in evolutionary scheme of things. Kuhn fundamentally disagrees with that. He says that instead of an evolution happening, among these paradigms, there is a revolution that has happened in between all these paradigms over a period of time. So when the shift took place, from Newtonian physics to electromagnetic physics, as per Kuhn, there wasn't an evolution, there was a revolution. And because of this revolution, there's a gap. There's a fault line between Newtonian physics and electromagnetic physics. Now, when I understood, the nature of paradigms and the fact that paradigms have influenced even science quite significantly, my understanding of science began to shift. And transposing this understanding, on the world of psychology, it was very easy for me to see that we have different truth contentions by different psychology schools, because different psychology schools follow different paradigms. Their assumptions are different. Their understanding of the nature of reality is different. So, this understanding sort of settled certain things within me. But there were other problems, that emerged. Now, the moment you say that scientific truth or psychological truth is relative to paradigms, you begin making an absolute statement about the nature of reality. The nature of reality becomes simultaneously relative and absolute. now. Just imagine, I was just 20 something when I was dealing with these issues. I was very young. So my question was, or rather my existential question was, how could truth be relative and absolute simultaneously? What's going on here? Or for that matter, scientific truths or psychological truths are subjective in nature, determined by the subjectivity or subjectivities of the practitioners. Paradoxically, even this statement can be considered an objective statement about the nature of reality. So the nature of reality became, at that point in time, for me, objective and subjective at the same time. You see how my mind started crumbling down? My mind actually started crumbling down, because these pieces of understanding could be extrapolated into other things as well. Good and bad exist, coexist, or exist simultaneously. Right and wrong exist simultaneously. True and false exist simultaneously. So I was like, what is going on? And this is my pre-Sri Aurobindo days. But all these questions, what they did for me was they turned my mind into a complete vegetable. Or this inquiry, almost completely decimated my mind. And this was the time, when I went to Pondicherry for the first time. And when something happened, I won't talk about that. That's we are practitioners of yoga, and both Mother and Sri Aurobindo have spoken about this, that we should not talk about that. So all that I would say is that something happened there and something decisive happened, which gave a very different direction to my life. When I came back to Delhi, I started encountering texts, that could shed more light on this. And very soon I found, passages in Vedanta and Buddhism, which were talking about this particular issue. Mahayana Buddhism, talks about the interdependence of binary halves or dualities. They discuss this quite extensively. Good does not exist without evil. Take out good, evil goes away. Take out evil, good goes away. Day does not exist without night. Take out day, night does not exist, and vice versa. Mountains do not exist without valleys. Valleys do not exist without mountains. Take one away, the other goes away as well. And through these discussions, I also realized that it was basically for the transcendence of mind that these two traditions were discussing these things in this particular manner. So, so this intellectual hankering for looking for truth at the expense of falsehood, or true at the expense of, falsity, right at the expense of wrong sort of disappeared, from my consciousness. Silencing the mind or putting the mind to rest, almost became a natural corollary. And then this whole world of, Mother and Sri Aurobindo began to evolve within me. So, I spoke about my experience, for a particular reason, and the reason was that this inquiry, that I underwent allowed me to sort of transcend my mind, and then later, uh, as I started studying philosophy more, I began to find that our knowledge pursuit in contemporary times is predominantly occurring within the realm of binaries. We all know about this, there's this mind-body problem. Where does this problem actually come from? We started looking at the human reality and bifurcated it, within two dichotomies or within two binary halves, mind and body, reason and emotion, God and world. You see? And that is the reason, I mean, not that this is the reason, but where does Sri Aurobindo begin his discussions in the Life Divine from? He talks about two negations, the negations of God by people, who are completely this worldly, and the negation of the world by people who are otherworldly. Where is this problem coming from? This is coming from this tendency of mind to bifurcate things, bifurcate issues. And incidentally, what also happens is that the moment you start thinking in binaries, consciously or unconsciously, you start privileging one and undermining the other. It's natural. Now, that's why, you have philosophers who are sort of privileging being and undermining becoming. And then there are philosophers, who are privileging becoming and undermining being. There's a binary split, between positivism and rationalism. The people who are positivists, they privilege senses over reason. And the people who are rationalists privilege reason over senses. And while they are privileging, their respective binary halves, they're undermining the other binary halves. This problem is absolutely pervasive. You can multiply these examples. It's a very, very similar kind of problem that you find, between science and religion. Scientists privileging science, undermining religion, religionists privileging religion, undermining science, you know, I don't want to dwell too much on this, because then it will become quite protracted, But as I said, this is part of a series. We'll come back to it again. But what I want to do today is that, I want to read some passages from Sri Aurobindo on this issue. That is the most exciting part of this, right? This is what I look forward to. And these passages are from Letters on Yoga, Volume 3. He writes, look at this, look at the beauty of what he's writing. Realizations are the essence of knowledge. Thoughts about them, expression of them in words, are a lesser knowledge. And if the thoughts are merely mental, without experience or realization, they are not regarded as jnana in the spiritual sense at all. We always have to go after experiences. These words, have been written to guide us towards having those experiences. And then to one of the disciples, he's writing, your mind is too active. If it were more quiet and less questioning and argumentative and restlessly wanting to find devices, it seems to me that there would be more chance of knowledge coming down and of intuitive, non-intellectual consciousness developing within you. I'm reading this again. Your mind is too active. The mind is very active. And as we, discussed in the last presentation, because the mind is active, there are vibrations in the mind. And these vibrations, they do not allow the experiences, the spiritual experiences, to descend or settle. The activity, the activity in the mind has to be gotten rid of. If it were more quiet and less questioning and argumentative, and restlessly wanting to find devices, it seems to me that there would be more chance of knowledge coming down and of intuitive, non-intellectual consciousness developing within. So long as the outer mind is not quiet, it is impossible for the intuition to develop. If you want to go on asking intellectual questions about what is beyond the intellect, until the intuition develops in spite of this activity, you will have to go on forever. The plane of intuition is above or behind the plane of mind. So until the plane of mind is transcended, one is not able to get into the plane of intuition. And the plane of intuition is definitely closer to truth. The mother has said this umpteen number of times, that if you really want to know what's going on, shut your mind off. Make your mind silent, surrender it to the divine, and ask the divine for truth. The divine never fails. A thousand questions can be asked about anything whatsoever, but to answer would require a volume. And even then, the mind would understand nothing. It is only by a growth in the consciousness itself then you can get some direct perception of these things. But for that, the mind must be quiet and a direct feeling and intuition take its place. One more and then I'll stop. You have only to allow the consciousness to develop. At first, there will be mistakes as well as true ideas. But when there is sufficient development and the mother's force and knowledge directly working in you, things will become more and more right. Not only so, but you will have the certitude. At present, there's too much of the old physical mind for perception to be always right. As the peace and force take direct and complete possession of the physical consciousness, this will change and the consciousness develop more surely with a greater light. So with that passage, I will close with respect to what I have to say and open the floor for discussions. Yes, Margaret, please.
Well, Kundan, thank you so much for your presentation in all its facets. From my experience, it's difficult. This is can be a difficult subject because you're working with where we are, but you're pointing to and you're sharing experience of something else. So I thought you were very effective in that. Gauging we're somewhere in that process, offering some support, offering, well, obviously, Sri Aurobindo's words, and your experience. Just giving some signposts maybe that we can reflect on where we are in our own process to help us move along in Beyond Mind.
You know, it's very fascinating. I mean, I definitely do prepare, you know, for these talks, but what I prepare does not really come out. The only things that come from my preparation is basically these letters, you know. Otherwise, I'm telling you, you know, she just takes over. So, you know, it's not me. I know that it's not me. It's, you know,
I
it's
understand.
it's for the collective yoga that we are doing. And the idea, you know, is to raise our consciousness, facilitate, you know, the evolution that we are undergoing, and basically do the work, you know, that she has given us. So, you know,
But Kundan, there are certain things that are helpful. And there were things that came through that were helpful.
Yes, you know.
I have a quick question, Kundan.
Yes.
When you were talking about your difficulties with the psychological programs in Delhi, and you know, deciding to step away and then being convinced to come back, and there, I believe you mentioned that you went to Pondicherry, and I was wondering what your motivation was. Had you come across some of Sri Aurobindo's work in your peripheral studies while pursuing psychology? Could you say anything about that?
Sri Aurobindo happened to me accidentally, you know. This is, so, you know, I didn't go to the full story. So after, you know, after I finished my master's, you know, I sort of had this understanding that there's more to psychology, but the more part was not clear to me, you know. So I was still looking for things, you know. I was still searching, and at that point in time, you know, I was encountering tremendous pressure, you know, from my physical mother to join Indian bureaucracy, you know. And my consciousness was not ready for it. You know, it wasn't. I mean, you know, it's like, and it's interesting. You know, I've always been good in studies, and I knew that, you know, that I would be able to clear that examination and join the services also. But I was not able to bring myself, you know, to joining the service, you know, after the deed was done, you know. But because, you know, because I really love my mother, you know, I was doing it for her. But then what happened was that the mother intervened, you know. While I was writing my examination, she completely took away my concentration. You know, I was not able to focus in terms of my preparation, you know, for the examination. And it was in that period, you know, that I came across, you know, Psychology, Mental Health and Yoga by Professor Dalal.
Oh,
So I basically went to Pondicherry, you know, to meet him so that I could pursue my studies, you know, or pursue my PhD in Sri Aurobindo studies. So that was the objective, you know, with which I went. But the first day itself that I arrived in Pondicherry, something else happened. Or the real thing happened, you know. All these things that were happening around me were basically excuses. So once I got there, you know, then my life completely changed. You know, it just took a different trajectory. One of these days, within proper context, within the context of yoga, I'll talk about it. Otherwise, it will become narcissistic. I don't want to go there. But from the perspective of yoga, one of these days, I'll talk about it. And see, it's like how it can be connected, to our experience, our practices, and the literature of integral yoga.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you for your questions and your comments. Yes, Raja.
Thank you, Kundan. As always, I appreciate the kind of slow, methodical, steady way that you build what you're wanting to say. I'm interested in the issue of binaries, and it might regress me a little bit more to the psychological and less to the spiritual, but I'm intrigued by it and have been for a while, because I noticed I actually learned from my daughter, my 30-year-old daughter, how the younger generation is really focusing on this issue of binaries. You're looking at it from such a binary point of view, and I was getting that from her. She wasn't coming from a consciously profound spiritual place. It was something that was emerging, it seemed to me, from the generation. And that's very interesting to me in the context of all that we're talking about. And I also think about in psychology and in psychopathology with the so-called borderline personality disorder, which is a social construct, but that's another conversation, I guess. But one of the primary symptoms of the borderline personality is what they call splitting, where the person is unable to hold two perspectives. If I hate you completely. My love for you is gone. I'm just in that hate. And the fact that psychology, took on that issue and tried to develop some of that understanding, I don't know, maybe I'm kind of, overstating the point, but I wonder if this is the culture, trying to get to this resolution of the binaries, that it's sort of emerging in these little ways here and there. So anyway,
beautiful point, beautiful point. And I would say, in order to shed light on we need to go into what Wilber has just written. Incidentally, he has taken it from Sri Aurobindo. He has not acknowledged it. This is intra-trans distinction. So the borderline split that you're talking about, that is happening at the infra level of consciousness. The transcendence of binaries, happens at a trans level. And as Wilber himself writes, there are superficial similarities between, infra-consciousness and trans-consciousness. So when you will look at the issue of binaries, from the infra level and from the trans level, at the superficial level, or at the superficial place, you'll find similarities. And those are the similarities that you're talking about. But at the fundamental level, at the conceptual level, there are profound dissimilarities. At the trans level, what emerges is psychic love. It's love for that individual as well as love for the entire humanity. It does not descend into hate. It never descends into hate. Even when you're fighting, dark evil forces, you would not descend into hate. In a certain sense, you can say that, that the proclivity or the tendency to descend into hate completely disappears, from one's consciousness. One becomes incapable of hating, I would say. And in contradiction, what emerges is this psychic love, and over a period of time, we will be getting into, the process of psychicization, and what are the various processes in which, the psychic being comes forward. So I hope, this sheds light on what you're talking about, but a beautiful observation, I must say, brother. Thank you. Yes, Michael.
For those who would like to learn more about Aurobindo, I think many of us just see him as this wise old sage, and we don't know where he came from. Through our new connection with Auroville International, they have recently released a wonderful documentary. I put a link in the chat. It's a 2-hour documentary. It's very well done. It goes from his earliest, just things I never knew about, perhaps you never knew about. But if you're interested in learning more about Aurobindo, I would suggest you take a look at this film.
Thank you. Thank you. I certainly will. Michael. Thank you so very much. Yes, Swaha. You're on mute.
Okay, I just wanted to second what Michael said, because this was released on Sri Aurobindo's birthday, and it's the first part of a trilogy, and it's 2.5 hours long. That kind of blew my mind, but it's his whole life up until the point where he gets to Pondicherry. And there's so much in there that I think it's just masterfully done. And so I just wanted to say, yeah, ditto what Michael said. And also not a question about your talk, which thank you very much, was great. But just, I always love synchronicities, and here at SASP on Saturday evening, we all bring passages, just anything from anything that they write, and come together and offer them. And what Ananda brought last night was the last 3 paragraphs from Essays on the Gita of the Kurukshetra, which is exactly this. It's all God, the dark and the light, and the dichotomy that you were talking about, and how our minds just can't, struggle so much to get it. It was it's having a big impact on him, and I just was feeling it a lot in what you with what you wrote. So I just wanted to share that, because, and then my reading was about intuitive mind and all that. So yeah, I just wanted to share that, because I think that these things are energies and currents, and they're out there, and I think we tap into them, and I love it when we're tapping into the same stuff at the same time. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you, Swaha. Thank you for sharing your experience. Yes, Linda, please.
Well, I also saw that wonderful movie, and it is fantastic. Earl and I saw that, and also a reminder to everybody: if you haven't read Peter Heese's book, I've read that many times. It just, even though it was controversial in some groups, I think it's an excellent book. And Kundan, I love the way you just brought yourself into your talk, and it's wonderful. And I'm so glad to get to know you. And I now agree with you about the intimate nature of this, and it's wonderful to come on and see Margaret and Jim and Swaha and you and Jean, who I already know, and Roger and Aparna and Barb and Peter and Michael, who I want to get to know, but I feel like I already know just from these wonderful Zooms. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Linda. Yes, Barbara.
I want to echo what Linda said in terms of, I was so happy that you personalized it. It just brought you into our experience and into your heart and ours. So to be connecting these two seemingly often opposite things and into parts of ourselves, vehicles of intelligence, I call them. And I wanted to share also, well, I'm sorry I came in late. I think I messaged you or emailed you to say that I had a board meeting, and the board meeting went forever. And I had coffee hour, so I've been cleaning up and listening. So when I got to CIIS, first of all, I didn't know which program was appropriate for me. But then I landed into integral counseling, and I'm so grateful that the founders of that program were there when I was there. And I was sorry to have missed Haridas, loved Bina. But my point is that I was so skeptical of all of these different perspectives, psychologically mainly. And the spiritual ones were easier for me to integrate. Although I had to dial back into Christianity to kind of loop that back in on a deeper level. But what really helped me, and this is very personal, is that I had to run every single psychological modality through a lens. And the lens that I used was psychosynthesis in its simplicity, to name all the changing parts of us, thoughts, feelings, etc., and to prioritize what's in back of that, which is our true identity. So you hit it right on the head, and thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you. I think, over a period of time, I would also address, various psychological schools, from the perspective of integral yoga. Because all these schools, and I'm not talking about this in a Wilberian way, are actually, capturing different aspects of the reality. And they can all be brought in, within the integral framework. And of course, Wilber has done it in his own way. He has his own perception of things. I would like to discuss it, from a different perspective. For instance, I have resonated with existentialism and humanism in a very, very deep manner. I resonated with Jung quite a bit at one point in time, and I still will be able to bring him, into the integral scheme of things. So all these different schools, at one point in time, look, relative to one another to me, but after a certain point in time, they could all be incorporated, within an integral framework. And this also, I think, is the blessing of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. So I think, over a period of time in discussions, these things will emerge and they will come in conversation. So thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you for making time. Because to tell you very honestly, I was pleasantly surprised to see you had written to me that you would not be able to participate today.
It's becoming my church day.
I just want to mention, Barbara mentioned psychosynthesis, and I love the way things intersect and what their connections are to different things. I mean, I didn't delve that deeply into psychosynthesis, but at some unconscious level, it somehow made an impression on me. But who did I get that from? It was from Paul Herman, who was connected to Dr. Chaudhary, and he was the founder of ICP. And so, yeah, it's nice the way some of these pieces fit together.
Yeah, and essentially, was familiar with the Indic thought. It's quite possible that he was familiar with the writings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother as well. He was developing.
I would, excuse me.
Yeah, please.
I would say definitely. I mean, Paul and Verne created integral psychology based on that, and maybe Haridas's, translation as well of Sri Aurobindo. But, I'm not sure how the program is faring now, but I'm so grateful that they founded it and were there when we were there. Masterfully, I think they created that program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a question of having a nuanced understanding of the integral vision of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and all these different schools. They just can be brought into that framework. Without actually rejecting any of them. That's the beauty of integral. That's the beauty of integral. Yes, Peter.
Thank you for Linda, Marx, and Barfield for your sharing of your own personal transformation. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It's a delight to see you every week.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. Thank you for participating on a regular basis. Yes, Aparna.
Hi. Thank you so much for a great talk, Kundan. I really enjoyed it. I was pretty much hanging on everything you were saying and just trying to absorb it all, but it's very interesting. I like the idea of how our thoughts are not knowledge, but realizations are knowledge, and the idea of trying to catch our thoughts and throw them out, which sounds really hard, but it's very interesting. I love it when I have realizations and my intuition comes into play. So just very interesting. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Aparna.
Yeah.
Should we close on that note?
Sure.
Over to you, Aparna.
Oh, well, I just want to thank everyone for being here. It's great to see everyone. Hope everyone has a wonderful day today, and hope to see you again soon. And thank you again, Kundan, so much for a really great talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Sunday. Bye.
Happy community.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Have a great